Okay, guys, we're back, figuring things out. So let's keep going with this. So the issue is that if we can, that we need cultural rules to follow because animals have sort of natural instinct to follow. They have an instinct about what's healthy and unhealthy to eat. But human beings don't work like that. We have to look at cultural traditions, and we have to put some lines down. We have to decide what it's okay to eat and what it's not okay to eat. Um, all right, so this is the dilemma. This is what makes it difficult. So let's take a look at Poland. So Poland says here, it says if nature, I'm over here, um, if nature won't draw a line around human appetite, then human culture must step in, and indeed it has done. Um, as indeed it has done, bringing the omnivore's eating habits under the government of all the various taboos, foremost one against cannibalism, customs, rituals, table manners, and culinary conventions found in every culture. So every human society has some kind of food rules. They have to, because otherwise human beings would just fucking eat each other. And so every culture has these rules, but this is the fucked up thing about human rules. They're just made up. So a lot of people are like, "Fuck it, I'm not going to do it. I don't care. I'm going to do whatever I want." If you've seen Dark Knight Rises, there's like a great scene, the best scene in the movie. The Joker burns all the money. One of the things that makes the Joker dangerous is human society, especially American society, really values money. I think money is very important. What Joker does is he sets all the money on fire because he's telling people, I don't give a shit about money. That makes him dangerous. If he doesn't care about money, usually if you want somebody to stop doing something, theoretically, you could pay them to stop. You can't pay the Joker to stop because he doesn't care about money. That makes him hard to control. Why? Because he's ignoring human rules. And the fucked up thing about human rules is they just make up. So you could just do something else. And this is the issue that Michael Pollan is discussing in here with food rules. Every society has to have some food rules. Okay. He says, all right, customs, rituals, table manners, culinary conventions. Culinary is things related to food, fine dining. There is a short and direct path from the omnivore's dilemma to the astounding number of ethical rules which people have sought to regulate eating for as long as they have been living in groups. Right? So the whole problem of that you can't eat anything, should you, leads people to create limits. Remember, think about like Socrates, right? His point was like, obviously, you're physically capable of jumping on people and having sex with them, but there are rules about who you're allowed to have sex with and when you're allowed to have sex with them. Because that human civilization is based off of rules, and this is Michael Pollan's point. Okay, I'm doing pretty good here. Finishing up page 2. All right. So at the bottom of page 2, he says, the first time I opened Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, again, see, that's a book. He's talking about a book he read, just like I want you guys to talk about books that you read, like you talked about Plato's Phaedrus in your papers. The first time I opened Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, I was dining alone at the Palm, that's a fancy restaurant, trying to enjoy a ribeye steak cooked medium rare. If that sounds like a recipe for cognitive dissonance, if not indigestion, well, that was sort of the idea. Okay, so cognitive dissonance. Cognitive has to do with the brain. Dissonance is when things do not go together. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive means the brain. Cognition is thinking. Dissonance is when things do not go together. They clash. If you play two notes at the same time and they sound really ugly, that's dissonance. It means they don't go together. So cognitive dissonance is when you are thinking two thoughts that are the opposites of each other. Cognitive dissonance is sometimes you'll think something and you'll also, you guys have all experienced cognitive dissonance. When you write school papers, for example, you might be like, oh, I really agree with this, but also I disagree with it. And when you're first starting your paper, you're often in a little bit of cognitive dissonance because you say, well, I see that he's right. This seems right, but in another way, it seems wrong. That's cognitive dissonance because your brain is essentially trying to think two contradictory, two opposite thoughts at the same time. I had some peanuts in there sticking in the back of my throat. It's weird now with COVID that you have to if I cough, I feel like I have to say why so people don't think I have COVID or whatever. So he says cognitive dissonance. Why is he experiencing cognitive dissonance? Because he's in a restaurant eating a steak, reading a book about why you shouldn't eat meat. It's cognitive dissonance, right? On the one hand, he's thinking this steak is delicious. On the other hand, he's reading a book that says eating these things is bad for you. Don't do morally bad, not just morally bad. Okay, so If that sounds like a recipe for cognitive dissonance, it's not indigestion. That's like indigestion is a stomach ache. Well, that was sort of the idea. It had been a long time since this particular omnivore, he's talking about himself here, had felt any dilemma about eating meat, but then I had never before involved myself so directly in the process of turning animals into food. Owning a stake-bound steer, working the killing cones in Joel Salatin's processing shed, and now preparing to hunt a wild animal. So something has changed for him. The author of the piece says that he's working in the food industry, right? He's literally, he bought a cow that he plans on eventually, killing and turning into steak. Um, so he's doing something most Americans don't do, which is most Americans they just buy meat at the store and it's already been cooked. Not cooked. Sorry, it's already been cut and it doesn't look like an animal anymore. It just looks like a cube. Or a rectangle or something, right? It's just like you got a package of ground beef. It looks like a rectangle. Cows don't look like that. But he is trying to do something bigger, where he's working with animals who are going to be food. And that's starting to change his mind. And he also says he's planning on hunting wild animals, which, by the way, my best friend is also planning on doing that. He wants to learn how to hunt because I think he sees something also that, like, if you're going to eat meat in the grocery store, you ought to have, like, a real understanding of where that comes from. And so he wants to hunt food so he can just have a sense. So he's not, because a lot of people feel disconnected and that's because, as David Foster Wallace points out, American culture wants you to eat a lot of meat. And so they disconnect the meat from the animal. Well, David Foster Wallace says one of the ways we do that is with language. We say, do you want sausage? Do you want bacon? Do you want pork? We don't call it a pig. And it helps you to forget that this came from an animal called a pig, right? Um, okay, cool. All right, so he's thinking about this. So some people feel like that disconnect between what you eat and how it got to you is a problem, and that people ought to know how these things got to them. They should experience. If you're going to eat meat, maybe you should experience what it's to actually watch the animal die. And this is why David Foster Wallace thinks the lobster is so interesting, because it's one of the only animals that if you cook it in your house, you also kill it in your house. You don't do that with pigs. Even in Manhattan, you can go buy a live lobster and drop it in a pot of boiling water and eat it. But you cannot go buy a cow and kill it in your apartment. And so David Foster Wallace was dealing with that issue, but it's the same thing here, which is both of these authors are dealing with watching their food be an animal first and die. Okay. So Michael Pollan says, the steak dinner in question took place on the evening before steer number 534 slaughter. Notice how the steer doesn't have a name, it has a number. That's another way of not feeling bad for the animal. Because if it just has a number, if it has a name like Larry, you're going to feel bad when Larry dies. But number 534, you're not going to feel as bad because it's just a number. By the way, we do the same things during the Holocaust. When Jews were being killed, they had numbers tattooed on them. It made them easier to kill. Because if you think about a person with a name and a history and feelings, you may not want to kill them. But if you just think they're just a number, they're a lot easier to kill. So one of the things racism does and prejudice does is it reduces people to things. Much easier to destroy a thing than to kill a person. That's why if you've ever seen a movie where somebody gets taken hostage, the first thing the person taken hostage always does is they go, I have children, I have a wife, I collect comic books, because you give the person who kidnapped you details about your life. They may feel worse killing you because they're going to try to think about you like just an object to destroy. And if you can make them feel for you as a human being by telling them a lot about yourself, they may feel bad and not kill you, is the idea. Okay, cool. We're doing good. All right, let's wrap up. Actually, you know what? This video is over. Let's go to the next video.